So this video, excuse me, this video is going to be talking about the burden of proof, and just some interesting thoughts that occurred to me with regards to the burden of proof. So I'm going to start by just doing a little bit of defining of terms here. In legal terms, the obligation of a party in a trial to produce the evidence that will prove their claims against another party. In a legal dispute, one party is assumed to be correct, and given the benefit of the doubt, the other bears the burden of proof. And in a philosophical discussion, when two parties are in discussion and one makes a claim the other disputes, he who makes the claim typically has the burden of proof to substantiate or justify the claim, especially when it challenges a perceived status quo. This is briefly stated in what is sometimes called Hitchens' razor. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And also, Carl Sagan added his bit, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Now, I am also going to just move to a quick, this is the first couple definitions that I was able to get off of Google for the word faith. Number 1, complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Number 2, strong belief in God and or religious doctrines based on spiritual apprehension rather than empirical proofs. I added the word empirical, it actually just said proofs. And then a subset of that one was a strongly held belief or theory. Now, I do want to draw your attention to what Carl Sagan said. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So I'm just going to break that word down slightly for you. Extraordinary is extra being outside and ordinary being ordinary or normal. So if we were to think about that, all right, I can agree an extraordinary claim can require, and probably should, extraordinary evidence. But now I really want to draw your attention to a certain question, and that is, what is the extraordinary claim? Because when you actually think about it, when 90%, maybe, I don't know the actual percent, but let's just say, we'll say 90%, and if it's less than that, maybe it was like 70 or something like that. The point being, the overwhelming majority of human beings throughout all of recorded history have believed in a God. So we can call this the ordinary claim. And these are subset claims where they all kind of fall under the same broad category of the ordinary claim, but then there are different specific ideas that kind of, getting slightly more into that. So then, simply by virtue of being the claim that is held by the vast majority of people, if I go back to this philosophical one, especially when it challenges a perceived status quo. Now, let's think about, a lot of times an atheist will say that they are not actually making a positive claim in the same way that someone who believes in God is. Someone who believes in God, a theist, is affirming, positively speaking, that God exists, whereas the atheist is simply saying, I don't believe that. But when you actually think about what people like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris will do, they're not just in a negative sense saying, I don't believe the claim that you're making. They're actually going out on speaking tours, they're writing books, and they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing the other thing. Hitchens was infamous for this, where they are actually making an emphatic positive claim that God doesn't exist. So we do actually have the extraordinary claim, and there are subsets of atheism. Not all atheists are the same, not all atheists believe the same things, but they all fall under the same broad category. But this is an extraordinary claim. So if we were to actually go with the burden of proof, where does the burden of proof lie? Well, if we actually think about, for example, Carl Sagan's statement, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But I do want to actually stress something. I don't think it is physically possible, no matter what, to prove that God does not exist. It cannot be done. However, I will also grant the atheist's statement that it is not possible to prove that God actually does exist either. You can't actually prove this in one direction or another, which is why we come back to the idea of faith. Now, we Go to the first definition. Complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Now, for a militant atheist, like someone like Christopher Hitchens, someone like Sam Harris, someone like Richard Dawkins, I want to actually kind of focus kind of heavily on the Hitchens-Dawkins type, more specifically, but there's never really any doubt. They have a very firm confidence in their own belief that there isn't a God. And this is a strongly held belief or theory. It is a strongly held belief. I would actually edit that to be more hypothesis. I mean, scientifically, a theory is a bit more concrete than that, but it is a strongly held belief that God doesn't exist. And I will also say, yes, strong belief in God, having faith in God, is not something that can be proven, and it is based on a spiritual apprehension. Now, going back to what Christopher Hitchens said, what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Well, someone like Christopher Hitchens is actually asserting that God does not exist in a positive sense. They're making a positive assertion that is extraordinary, as in outside the ordinary for all of human history, and asserting it without any actual concrete evidence. And even as Mr. Hitchens said, because I think I established a little bit earlier, it is not possible to prove the non-existence of God. Well, what Hitchens is therefore asserting without evidence, a theist can also dismiss without evidence. But when you actually consider the facts here, it's entirely unhelpful for anyone on either side of any philosophical discussion to invoke this, especially when it comes to something like the question of God. I mean, the people who are honest on both sides of the aisle will acknowledge that, no, it's not really possible to prove 100% one way or the other, and that's the important part to remember, or the other. And so if we kind of just moved past this whole what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence sort of thing, and ultimately when you really think about what that's saying is, I don't actually have to engage with you as my intellectual equal because I am right and you are wrong, because I can't prove my position, but because you can't prove yours, I can dismiss yours without actually thinking about it or considering it. And I would like to apologize for a moment. I don't feel like I phrased that last bit entirely well, but I hope you'll kind of get what I'm trying to say here. This sort of, I don't know. The only way that we're ever actually going to be able to have civil discussions, and I have been incredibly thankful to be able to have civil discussions in the comment sections of my videos and in other places. So I want to say thank you to all of you atheists who have been commenting and who've been very respectful, and, just God bless you, but, take that for what it's worth, from the heart. But the only way that we can actually have that kind of a discussion is when we are not just automatically dismissing everything that the other person says right out of the gate. And here I want to go back to this question of faith. Now, most atheists will say that they are utterly without faith. They are faithless. They simply do not believe in God. And the thing that I really want to address is more the atheist who actually falls into the first definition of actually having a complete confidence in their own belief that there is no God. They are so solidly convinced of that nothing that is ever said or heard or anything that they would ever experience could ever possibly change their mind, because they have settled the issue and have a complete trust. This person is arguing from a position of faith, often while stating that they are arguing from a position of evidence. And it's kind of unhelpful. I acknowledge it's probably fairly annoying for atheists to constantly be battling against the idea that, oh, you have faith that God does not exist, and so on and so on. And yes, I'm sorry for that, because I have done that myself. But ultimately, when a person says the atheist has faith that God does not exist, this is generally being used in reference to one of the more militant or outgoing evangelizing atheists. And they are so confident that God does not exist that they actually do fall under the category of faith. However, I do acknowledge a fair number of atheists don't actually fit that position. But I guess the main thing is I want to come back to this idea of the burden of proof. If we were to go with Carl Sagan's explanation that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, the burden of proof would actually fall onto the atheist, just because the theist position is the ordinary position. I mean, atheism has always been a minority in every culture. I want to rephrase that. It's growing more in Europe these days, but I mean, throughout the vast majority of human history, atheism has been a minority, and it remains a minority here in the States. So if we were to go with that, then we could say, well, the atheist is making the extraordinary claim, and they need to provide an extraordinary evidence that God does not exist. Or, what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. I mean, sure, we could say, I assert the existence of God by faith completely. I can't prove that to you in any possible way. Only God can reveal himself to you, and that's going to be largely up to, well, it's entirely up to him. That's not something I can do for you. So, I mean, we could say that, but ultimately, the idea of the burden of proof is what I really want to end on, is that since neither one of us is actually going to be able to prove our positions 100%, the very idea of even having a discussion based around who has the burden of proof or not is a little bit disingenuous. We're talking about things that cannot, full stop, be proven one way or the other, and then trying to just shift the burden of proof back and forth between each other. So, admittedly, I could have just left it on the idea of, well, you're making the actual extraordinary claim, and therefore you have to provide the extraordinary evidence, but that's not actually what I want to do. What I really want to do is just get everyone to think about the fact that if you're a Christian and you're watching this, your position is based on faith. It is a strong confidence that God's word is true, and that its description of the gospel, the salvation of sinners, and the redemption from sin by Jesus Christ is a true thing. It's having confidence in what God has said. It's written, I think it's in 1 John 5, where it says, "He that believes not God has made God a liar," because this is what God has said, and anyone who doesn't believe it just doesn't think that God's telling them the truth. But, so yeah, what I'm saying is, if you're a Christian and you're watching this, don't bother with the burden of proof, because you cannot prove your position. Your position is based on faith, and without faith it is impossible to please God, Hebrews chapter 11. So be strong in your faith, and don't let anyone shift you away from that by saying, but you can't prove it. It doesn't matter. The atheist can't prove their position either, and frankly, that's okay to not be able to prove it. And if you're an atheist and you're watching this, I would just like you to really think about the fact that you also can't prove your position 100% either. So to dismiss the theist's position, whether you're talking, for an atheist to dismiss the position that God is there on the basis of it hasn't been proven to be true. Yes, but it hasn't been proven to be false either. And it's actually empirically impossible to prove God is there or is not there. So either position is going to come down to faith in one sense or another. And I'm going to just end on that, and I hope you all have a very good night. I hope this helped, and leave me a comment. I'd love to have a discussion with you. God bless. Bye.